The biggest issue what we have with this game is the out-of-the-box HDR black level floor, because as you can see here right now, this is just terrible. This is a game what is playing most of the time, 99% of the time, in a dark environment. So you must have perfect OLED blacks. This right now looks absolutely awful because we're talking about an HDR black level floor of around 0.14 nits. This is way too much to have a proper contrast. Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Before we start, please do me a very big favor, please like, share, and if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. And now let's talk about HDR on or in this game. And I have tested the PlayStation 5 version, so keep that in mind if you play PC or any other version. Maybe HDR is different, but most likely it's exactly the same. And what I found is also, have a look here right now. This is just a perfect HDR black level floor. We have perfect blacks here on the start screen. I don't get it, because as soon as we're starting actually the game, and this is what we want to do, we want to play the game, not just watching a start screen, but as soon as we're starting the game, you will actually see, as soon as we're jumping in, give me a second, this is live. Okay, have you seen this? Absolutely, I don't even have words for this. Why are we doing this? I don't understand this, but thanks God, the settings in the game, we can mitigate this awful HDR black level floor to some extent. Okay, let's just quickly take a closer look on the HDR settings what we have in this game. And again, this is the PlayStation 5 version, and those are the out-of-the-box or factory settings. So we have the HDR maximum luminance slider, we have the HDR mid luminance, we have the HDR minimum luminance, HDR brightness setting, HDR user interface brightness setting, HDR user interface contrast setting. Now the question is, what are those settings are actually doing? So let's talk about the HDR max luminance slider first, because here we have actually our first problem, because as in, not many other games, but in some other games, this setting sometimes is not doing or reacting as you like to have it, because right now this is set to 2000 and we would like to see actually 2000 nits in specular highlights. But this is what we're getting, 1600 nits. This is actually not bad for my LG G4, but you get my point. The slider is set to 2000 and we're just getting roughly 1600 nits. So I have prepared a table, of course, with proper settings, but let's continue with the other settings first. And now I'd like to talk about two settings what we have in the game, the HDR mid luminance slider and the HDR brightness slider. And what I found is during my testing that both sliders, both settings are actually doing pretty much the same. So let me just quickly demonstrate this. So HDR mid luminance to the absolute minimum. You can see the picture is very, very dark now. And we're just having a very quick look on the HDR black level floor, which is now perfect. Not perfect, but pretty much on spot. But now, of course, the game is very, very dark. So let me just jump back into the settings. Let me reset this to the factory setting, and let's say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, whatever. Let's just do this quickly. We're reducing the HDR brightness setting to around 15 steps. And we have more or less the same result. So I did a lot of testing and I couldn't find a difference at all. So either I'm using the HDR midpoint setting to mitigate the HDR black level floor, or I'm using the HDR brightness setting. And by the way, there is no difference in regards to the HDR maximum peak brightness and specular highlights. I tested this as well. So that's why today we're actually not touching the HDR brightness setting. We're just focusing on the HDR mid luminance slider. And last but not least, we have the HDR user interface brightness setting, and we have also the HDR user interface contrast setting. So I haven't touched the HDR user interface contrast setting. I just actually adjusted the HDR user interface brightness setting and I reduced it to around 200 nits, probably, whatever, 200, because I found 350 is just way too bright. But feel free to adjust those two settings as you like it, because they're not affecting the HDR black level floor and they're also not affecting the HDR peak brightness and specular highlights. And of course, now you like to know what are the best HDR settings for your screen, TV or monitor. And I told you already, there is an issue with the HDR maximum peak brightness setting, and I hope you understand my table here, but in order to get 800 nits for your LG CX, for an example, okay, so this time I did not forget this TV, you must set the HDR maximum luminance slider in the game to 900, okay? Then you get 800 nits. So let's say you have an LG G4 like I do here, and the maximum peak brightness for this TV is 1500 nits. In order to get 1500 nits in specular highlights, you must set the HDR maximum luminance slider to 2000. The maximum peak brightness, the absolute maximum peak brightness in this game is, by the way, 3000 nits, and you must set the HDR maximum luminance slider to 5000, okay? So for an example, the LG G5 has roughly around 2000 nits, maybe a little bit more, so set it a little bit higher than 3000 nits in game, and you get the best out of the box, or you get the best experience then for your TV, for the LG G5. So in order to get a better contrast, in order to get a better HDR black level floor, I would strongly recommend to change the HDR mid luminance slider from 6, which is the standard setting, to at least 4. At least 4. Better is actually 3 in my opinion, because you get a better HDR black level floor, you get a better contrast, but the game is really, really dark then, okay? So this is up to you. At least 4. Better in my opinion is 3, but then play in a complete dark room. All the other settings, don't touch the HDR minimum luminance slider, don't touch the HDR brightness slider. You can adjust the HDR user interface brightness and contrast slider if you want. And yeah, that's it. Change this and you're good to go. And I know I will get this question in my comment section. What about HGiG? What about dynamic tone mapping on? Before we talk about those two tone mapping options, let's talk about dynamic tone mapping off. And in most of the cases, in most of the games, dynamic tone mapping off is the worst decision, okay? So either stick to HGiG or dynamic tone mapping on. But what is now the difference? And I'm pretty sure you can see it. You get a much brighter picture, average picture brightness is higher with dynamic tone mapping on. You're not getting a higher maximum peak brightness in specular highlights, okay? So that's not possible, because HGiG on the LG G4 is already offering 1500 nits. Dynamic tone mapping on is exactly doing the same, maximum 1500 nits. In regards to specular highlights, dynamic tone mapping on is tends to clip very fine details or details in specular highlights, okay? So you will end up maybe with a lot of clipping, okay? Keep that in mind. And also, if a game like that, or if a game in general has a poor HDR black level floor, that means raised blacks, with dynamic tone mapping on, you will make it even worse, because it's not just the midtones what get pushed up to give you a brighter picture, or the average picture brightness is getting higher. You will also lift up the midtones and the lower tones. So that means you have more HDR black level raise, okay? So keep that in mind. But at the end, it's up to you. If you play in a very bright room, because this game is very scary, and I don't blame you, then maybe use dynamic tone mapping on. But if you're a big grown man like me, and you play in a complete dark room, then use HGiG. And of course, I'm just kidding, because when it comes to games like that, I'm an absolute chicken. I'm so scared when I'm playing this. I'm getting so sweaty hands, but I like it. I really like it. Especially this game, especially other games like Silent Hill or Resident Evil. This is really fantastic. Especially the sound. Oh my god, amazing. Gameplay-wise, so far, really good. I mean, nothing new, honestly. Nothing new, because we have seen stuff like that million of times, but it's a new setting, it's a new story, and again, I like it. The HDR implementation is meh, because it's just not perfect, okay? I mean, we haven't seen any perfect HDR presentation or implementation. I don't know. When was the last time? I really don't know, honestly. The problem what we have with, the biggest problem what we have with bad HDR implementations is the HDR black level floor. I wouldn't even mind if they messing up the HDR maximum peak brightness, okay? Because it really doesn't matter that much, because you don't have time to look at specular highlights and to see all the details. You don't have time for this when you play the game. But if you have a bad HDR black level floor, this is present all the time. And there's nothing what we can do about it. Even now we're changing the settings. The HDR mid luminance slider, we are not getting any information back because it's very simple. We have here out of the box an HDR black level erase of, I think it was 0.15. That's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. Game looks absolutely washed out. So now what we're trying to do is actually we're getting the HDR black level floor down. Okay? But it seems to me, and yeah, that's how it is, we are not adding any information because all what is happening, you know, HDR black level erase is here, 0.15. We're trying to get this down, but it's pushing everything down. Okay, so it's of course getting, how should I explain? It's pushing everything down, but there is no information in what you can display now. If you compare this with other games where we have really, really great HDR black level floor. Resident Evil 2 and 3 are also examples of great HDR black level floor. Not in all the levels or rooms, but this game can offer perfect HDR black level or HDR or OLED black. And if you compare this or even Gears 5, Gears 5 is also a very great example of having a perfect, almost perfect HDR implementation. Compare this with games like that and you can see so much more details here. This is all still looks washed out even with my recommended settings, but we don't have any details here. It just looks odd. It looks off because there is no details. Even you're not changing the HDR mid luminance slider, you're not getting more details. All what you're getting is a washed out picture and washed out textures, okay? That's the problem. That's the problem with HDR black level floor. Anyway, I do like the game. I hope you enjoy this as well. And I try actually, you need to hold and press and then, yeah, I've done this. Hold and charge, yeah, I'm doing this. Okay, now, and then you can move on. Anyway, thank you very much for watching me. I hope you liked this video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.